My friends, so before you blame each other, fight this enemy first. The invisible forces that distort your love, twist your words, and weaken your bond. Fight stress, fight assumptions, fight silence. Because those are the enemies, not the person you care about. We often treat conflict in relationships as if it's proof of incompatibility, as if every argument is a red flag, every miscommunication a sign we've chosen the wrong person. But more often than not, conflict isn't personal, it's systemic. It's the result of environmental pressures, unconscious conditioning, and unspoken expectations that neither person fully understands. Until they clash, imagine two people who care deeply about each other, but suddenly they find themselves locked in yet another argument about the same thing. It could be something as trivial as chores or as serious as financial decisions. The pattern is predictable. One person feels unheard, the other feels criticized, and it escalates. What's interesting is that both walk away feeling hurt, but neither truly knows why the conversation turned sour. Here's what's happening beneath the surface. Instead of fighting each other, they're actually both reacting to systems that they've internalized, past experiences, beliefs about love, survival habits from childhood, or stress from work and life. These things don't show up as obvious enemies, but they shape how we show up in conflict. Take a simple example. A person who grew up in a home where emotions weren't openly expressed might now withdraw when things get tense. Their partner, who values openness and emotional connection, interprets this as rejection. So the partner pushes for closeness, which makes the first person retreat further. The dynamic spirals. But the core issue, it's not that one person is cold and the other is needy. It's that both are reacting to systems that were set in place long before they ever met. Now introduce modern life into the equation: chronic stress, long work hours, financial insecurity, social media comparisons, or parenting pressures. These factors aren't unique to one relationship. They're widespread. They are systemic. And they create an emotional environment where it's easier to feel overwhelmed, emotionally undernourished, and on edge. So what do? We look for the quickest source of relief. Unfortunately, that often means blaming the person closest to us, the one who's supposed to understand, support, and just get it. But when we start seeing our partner as the problem instead of seeing the problem as the problem, we lose the chance to unite. We go to war with the wrong enemy. This mindset is dangerous, not just because it causes harm, but because it blinds us to the real source of disconnection. It tricks us into believing that if the other person would just change, we'd be okay. It rarely crosses our mind that both people might be responding to pressure that neither of them created, and that if they could just name it, they could face it together. Here's the shift. When we realize that conflict often has more to do with context than character, we soften. We get curious instead of critical. We ask, what else could be influencing how we're reacting right now, rather than, why are they always like this? That simple shift opens the door to compassion. And compassion is what transforms conflict into connection. Now let's be clear, this isn't about excusing harmful behavior or avoiding accountability. It's about acknowledging that many disagreements are amplified by invisible forces that make everything feel more intense, more personal, and more painful than it needs to be. The next time you find yourself in a heated moment, try this, pause. Ask yourself, what systems might be influencing us right now? Are we both stressed, tired, feeling unsupported outside the relationship? Are we repeating learned behavior from our upbringing without realizing it? By identifying the system, the emotional climate, the unspoken rule, the external pressure, you free both people from playing the role of the villain. You stop treating each other like threats and start seeing yourselves as allies navigating a storm together. A fight isn't always between two people. Sometimes it's two people fighting something they haven't named yet. And naming it is the first step toward overcoming it. The real enemy is usually unmet needs, not your partner. The tone remains educational, emotionally grounded, and relationship-focused. In the middle of an argument, it's easy to think the other person is the problem. They're not listening, they're being dismissive, they're not saying the right thing, or they're saying everything wrong. You're left feeling angry, disconnected, and misunderstood. But so often, what's fueling that emotional fire isn't just the words or actions in front of you, it's what's missing beneath the surface. In nearly every relationship, what drives the most tension isn't someone's attitude, but a deeper emotional need that hasn't been acknowledged or met. These needs aren't always obvious. In fact, most people don't walk around saying, I need to feel safe, or I need reassurance right now, or I need to know I matter to you. Instead, we act them out. We overreact to small things. We shut down. We become critical. We pull away or push too hard, not because we're bad partners, but because our nervous system is doing whatever it can to get what it's missing. And when those needs go unspoken, or worse, unnoticed, conflict becomes inevitable. Take a simple example. One partner comes home from work, exhausted, emotionally drained, and just wants quiet. The other has been waiting all day for connection, craving conversation and warmth. When silence meets expectation, it sparks frustration, not because one person doesn't care, but because one person needs rest and the other needs closeness. Neither need is wrong, but if they aren't recognized, both people feel like they're losing. That's the danger of unmet needs. They don't just remain unmet, they begin to shape your perception. Suddenly, you don't just feel neglected, you start believing they don't care about me. You don't just feel frustrated, you tell yourself they never listen, I always come last. These beliefs build resentment, and resentment slowly replaces intimacy. We tend to focus on behavior instead of what's behind it. We say, why are you being distant? Instead of asking, is there something you need right now that you're not getting? We accuse rather than investigate. But unmet needs are not the same as unmet love. They're clues, they're signals. And when we learn to recognize them in ourselves and in others, the entire dynamic of a relationship changes. Think about a child crying. We don't ask, why are they being difficult? We ask, what do they need? Maybe they're tired, hungry, scared, or just need comfort. Adults aren't that different. We've just learned to mask our needs with frustration, control, sarcasm, or withdrawal. But the core is still the same. We want to feel seen, safe, valued, heard. When those things are missing, we start looking for someone to blame, and the easiest target is usually the person closest to us. So what if we took a different approach? Instead of asking what's wrong with them, we asked, what are they needing right now that they don't know how to ask for? What if, instead of labeling ourselves as too much or too needy, we got honest about what we crave and gave ourselves permission to express it clearly and calmly? That one shift creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is what allows people to stop defending and start connecting. It's what turns arguments into understanding and silence into space for honest conversation. Let's also be real. This takes practice. It takes slowing down in the heat of a moment and resisting the urge to win, prove, or withdraw. It takes getting curious instead of reactive. And it takes a commitment to recognizing that people are usually doing the best they can, not always skillfully, but sincerely, to get their needs met. Relationships thrive not because conflict is avoided, but because partners learn how to decode each other's needs in the midst of that conflict. They learn to ask, what's underneath this? And how can I show up for you in a way that actually lands? Because when you see the need, you stop fighting the person and start fighting for the relationship. The most powerful thing you can say is not, why are you like this? But tell me what you need that you're not getting. That's where healing begins. That's where connection grows. Because unmet needs, not our partners, are the real enemy, and they only win when we don't name them. Would you like this adapted into an interactive worksheet or reflection guide for couples or individuals? Stress distorts perception. Educational tone that supports emotional insight and personal growth. Stress is one of the most powerful invisible forces in our lives. It doesn't just make us feel tired or overwhelmed. It reshapes how we see the world, how we interpret others' actions, and how we respond in moments of tension. When we're under stress, we don't just experience life differently. We start telling ourselves stories that may not be true, and those stories become dangerous when they involve the people we care about. And stress acts like a filter over your eyes. It doesn't just color how you see your partner, it distorts it. Things that wouldn't normally bother you suddenly feel like personal attacks. A delayed reply feels like neglect. A neutral tone sounds cold. A missed hug becomes rejection, not because the other person is acting differently, but because your nervous system is overloaded and looking for signs of threat, even when none are actually there. Here's why this matters. When we're in a heightened state of stress, our brain's priority shifts from connection to protection. It moves us into survival mode. That means we're not thinking about how to communicate with empathy or how to listen with curiosity. We're scanning for danger, trying to control the environment, and interpreting neutral moments as proof that we're not safe or loved. In that state, our perception becomes less about what's real and more about what confirms our fear. This is why two people can live in the same home, experience the same external pressures, and yet spiral into conflict, not because of the pressures themselves, but because of how those pressures are interpreted through the lens of stress. And because stress responses differ from person to person, what soothes one person might overwhelm another. One might shut down and become quiet, while the other needs connection and communication. Without understanding that both responses are coming from stress, it's easy to misread the silence as withdrawal or the talkativeness as nagging. And just like that, disconnection grows. Not because either person changed, but because stress changed how they see each other. Here's the thing we forget. Perception is not fixed. It fluctuates with our emotional state. And when we're stressed, our internal narratives often lean toward negativity. We become more sensitive to tone. We assume bad intent. We forget the benefit of the doubt. Our ability to interpret actions accurately decreases, but our confidence in our negative conclusions increases. A dangerous combination. A simple question like, "Did you take out the trash?" can land in two completely different ways, depending on whether you're relaxed or stressed. In a calm state, it's just a question. Under stress, it becomes, "They think I'm lazy, they're criticizing me again." And now you're responding not to the words, but to the threat you think is hidden inside them. Stress creates emotional noise. And in that noise, even loving words can be drowned out. Even kind gestures can go unnoticed. The filter becomes so strong that you don't just misinterpret, you miss moments of love altogether. That's why recognizing stress is critical in any relationship, because if you don't realize you're stressed or that your partner is, you'll start believing the distorted story. You'll start reacting to the perception instead of the person. And once that cycle begins, it feeds itself. Stress causes misinterpretation, which causes conflict, which adds more stress. And before long, two people who love each other feel like strangers or enemies, not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped seeing clearly. So what can you do? You pause. You name the stress. You take a moment to ask yourself, am I responding to what's actually happening right now or to what I think it means? You learn to say, I might be seeing this through a fog. Can we slow down for a second? You practice asking your partner, are you okay? Is something else weighing on you right now? Instead of jumping to conclusions. So stress isn't something we can always eliminate, but we can build awareness around it. We can learn to recognize when our perception might be off, and we can develop the humility to admit when we're not seeing clearly, not because we're weak, but because we're human. Because the more we understand how stress shapes our reality, the more compassion we gain for ourselves and for the people we love. And that's what allows us to stop fighting shadows and start seeing each other again. Would you like a practical checklist to help recognize stress distortion in real time? Here's the expanded version of the fourth keynote. Poor communication is a symptom, not the disease. This is written in an emotionally intelligent, educational tone. When people say a relationship is struggling, they often point to one core issue. We just don't communicate well. It's a common phrase, and it feels true. The conversations are tense, repetitive, or surface level. There are misunderstandings, silence, sarcasm, or emotional outbursts. One person withdraws, the other pursues. It feels like the communication is broken. But here's the truth we often overlook. Poor communication isn't the root of the problem. It's a symptom, a signal, a mirror reflecting something deeper that's been ignored, avoided, or misunderstood. Think of communication as the output, not the source. It's the end result of how safe you feel with someone, how clearly you understand your own needs, how much trust exists in the relationship, and how emotionally regulated you are in the moment. When those internal and relational foundations are shaky, communication naturally becomes strained, not because either person is incapable of expressing themselves, but because they don't feel safe or supported enough to do it well. Imagine trying to share something vulnerable while walking across a tightrope. That's what it feels like when emotional safety is missing. Every word feels risky. Every response feels like a potential threat. So people start filtering themselves. They avoid saying what they really mean. They edit their emotions to keep the peace or brace for impact. And when your voice is walking on eggshells, real communication disappears, not due to lack of love or effort, but because the environment doesn't feel safe enough for honesty to exist. Communication breaks down because the real issue hasn't been identified. Couples will argue endlessly about things like schedules, dishes, or who texted who first, but underneath, the real conflict might be about not feeling prioritized, respected, appreciated, or seen. That's why those arguments never feel resolved, because the words being exchanged are just the surface layer. The deeper emotions stay untouched, and so the disconnection keeps growing. This is where frustration builds. One person keeps trying to fix the communication while the other is exhausted from having the same conversations again and again. They try new techniques, active listening, using I statements, timing things better, but it still doesn't work. Why? Because they're trying to treat the symptom without diagnosing the actual disease. The real issue is fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of not being enough, fear of conflict escalating into abandonment. That fear causes people to shut down or lash out, to deflect or become passive aggressive. And again, the communication looks like the problem when in reality, the fear underneath is what's controlling the interaction. What's the shift? Instead of obsessing over how someone is saying something, start asking why it's being said that way. What are they protecting? What are they afraid of? What need is trying, however clumsily, to come forward? And when it's your turn to speak, try asking yourself, what am I really trying to communicate here? Is it frustration, or is it that I feel invisible? Is it anger, or is it hurt? And when we stop treating communication as a mechanical skill and start understanding it as an emotional byproduct, everything changes. The goal isn't perfect dialogue, it's deeper connection. And that comes from uncovering the real emotions that live beneath the words. Fixing the words alone won't repair the relationship, but creating safety, listening with empathy, being willing to sit with discomfort, that will. Because when people feel safe, valued, and understood, they naturally begin to communicate more clearly. They don't have to yell or hide. They don't have to twist their needs into blame. They can just be real. So if communication is breaking down, pause before you reach for a new technique. Ask, what's the real emotion beneath this? What hasn't been acknowledged yet in me or in them? Because once you address the emotional truth underneath, the words start to take care of themselves. Would you like a visual model or diagram that maps this symptom-disease relationship for presentations or learning materials? Here's the expanded version of the fifth keynote. You're either on the same side of the problem or you become each other's problem. Presented in a thoughtful, educational tone that encourages emotional clarity and relational maturity. In any relationship, romantic, familial, or even professional, there comes a point where tension rises, misunderstanding builds, and emotions run high. In that moment, there's a choice to make, whether we're aware of it or not. The choice is this. Are we going to stand shoulder to shoulder and face the problem together? Or are we going to stand on opposite sides and turn each other into the problem? This choice determines the direction of the relationship, because when couples or partners start seeing each other as the problem, the relationship slowly shifts from a space of unity to a battlefield. Every disagreement becomes a fight to win. Every conversation becomes a defensive maneuver, and trust, little by little, begins to erode, not because of the original issue, but because of how both people responded to it. Most problems in relationships aren't insurmountable. In fact, many of them are manageable. Timing conflicts, emotional needs, family dynamics, external stressors. What makes them feel impossible is the way they become personalized. Instead of looking at the issue objectively as a shared challenge that requires joint problem solving, we begin to link the issue directly to our partner's character. It's no longer we're stressed because life is chaotic right now. It becomes you never help, or you're the reason I feel alone. And once that happens, the focus shifts from solving the problem to defending ourselves from the person we love. This is the emotional pivot that causes the most damage, when the problem stops being the issue and the person becomes the threat. What does this look like in everyday life? It looks like arguments that escalate quickly because neither person feels heard. It looks like avoiding conversations because they always end in blame. It looks like a sense of emotional loneliness, even when you're sitting next to each other. Because when you're no longer working together on what's hurting the relationship, you end up hurting each other instead. Not intentionally, but by default. Being right often comes at the cost of being connected. And in a strong relationship, the goal is not to win the argument, it's to protect the bond. When both people decide to stop proving who's more right or who's more wrong, and instead start asking, how can we face this together? The entire dynamic changes. The conflict doesn't go away instantly, but now the energy shifts from combat to collaboration. It's not about ignoring your own feelings or needs. It's about recognizing that when you turn your partner into the enemy, nobody wins. Because at that point, even if you get your way, the relationship suffers. The victory becomes hollow. What matters more is feeling understood, supported, and seen, and that only happens when both people step onto the same side of the issue. Let's say you're in a disagreement about finances. You can either attack each other, you're responsible, you're controlling, you always do this, or you can step back and say, clearly, we both feel tense about this. Let's figure out why this is such a trigger for each of us and how we can create a plan that works for both. That one shift from accusation to curiosity is what gets you back on the same team. When you make the problem the shared enemy, you stop fighting each other. You start communicating not to win, but to understand. You begin to look at how each person's experiences, fears, and expectations are showing up. And instead of judging them, you explore them together. This is where real partnership lives, not in always agreeing, but in choosing alignment, even in disagreement. Every relationship will have problems, but the healthiest relationships are the ones where both people say, no matter what, I'm not fighting against you, I'm fighting with you for us. When you let the problem divide you, it wins. But when you let it unite you, it becomes the very thing that strengthens your bond. Here's a powerful, emotionally resonant conclusion that ties together all 5 keynotes from your speech, titled, "Before you blame each other, fight this enemy first," written in the emotionally intelligent, educational tone you've requested. So before you point the finger, before you walk away, raise your voice, or sink into silence, pause, ask yourself, what are we actually fighting here? Because more often than not, it's not your partner you're at war with. It's stress, it's emotional wounds, it's fear, it's unmet needs, it's the internal weight you both carry, sometimes without even realizing it. And when those forces go unspoken, they turn the people we love into opponents we defend ourselves against. But it doesn't have to be that way. Conflict doesn't mean a relationship is broken. It means something important is asking to be understood. The real breakdown happens when we start believing the enemy is each other instead of recognizing the emotional forces trying to divide us. Stress distorts our view. Unmet needs go unspoken. Communication collapses under the pressure. And if we're not careful, we become so focused on defending ourselves that we forget to protect the relationship. So the next time you're tempted to blame the person in front of you, remember, you're not on opposite teams. You're just stuck in a moment that needs gentleness, clarity, and courage. Step back, breathe, see each other again. Ask the deeper questions. Align yourselves against the real enemy, the fear, the miscommunication, the unspoken pain, and stand on the same side. Because the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face conflict. They're the ones where two people choose again and again not to fight each other, but to fight for each other. And when you do that, you don't just survive the hard moments, you grow through them together.